me turn on the recording just to make sure everyone is
All
comfortable.
right. It
And
looks like everyone's coming in. Welcome. All right.
cool.
Alexi, if you want to hit that music, we can have some background music while we wait for more people to join us.
Good. Sounds good. We're gradually growing in numbers from what I can see.
Awesome.
So we're expecting some good turnouts. We've had quite a lot of registrations. Definitely the pretty hot topic for a lot of wedding pros. I think it'll be cool. It's definitely
Great.
finance is like the most interesting topic, close to me. So I'm very excited to to talk about that.
Same.
For
Cool.
sure. Yeah, if everyone wants to just go ahead and pop your company or where you're joining us from in the chat, we'd love to get to know you a little bit better before we get started here.
Yeah, guys. Leave leave your name, where you're from, what business you're running. It'll be really good to kind of pulse the group, just in case some very like targeted questions that might come up. So yeah, Q&A is a big part of the webinars like that because a lot of like practical things might come up.
And feel free to ask
Yeah,
questions. We definitely want some feedback. Feel free to
Absolutely.
probe a little bit.
for
Yeah.
sure.
And
And
David,
yeah.
we were chatting, before, about the events. But how was your New Year?
My New Year was great. I usually work every other New Year's Eve, so this year was a year off. And I was down in Mexico with a group of friends. So it was a good little recharge moment. Yeah, spent a few weeks down there and then came back to snowy, cold Boston.
Okay, okay, that's cool. All right, I think Pri, do you think we should start or give
Yeah,
it like
let's do
another?
it.
Awesome. So hi everyone. My name is Alex, founder and CEO of Maru. This is my first webinar. I'm super excited to have it with our guest, which I'm gonna mention in a second. Just a quick intro. Myself and Priyanka will be on the call. If you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the chat and Q&A. Pri will help with with some points and to bring up stuff that it's worth to chat verbally. And with that, we're excited to be joined by David DiCicco, founder and creative director of DiCicco Design, based out of Boston. David, is it where you are right now?
It is, yes, I'm back.
Oh, how is this transition from going from warm Mexico to pretty chilly Boston? From what I'm hearing, like there is a blizzard or something.
It's not too bad. You know what? I actually love it when it snows. So it's been nice to come back and experience that a little bit. I know people think I'm crazy when I say that, but I grew up north of the city, so yeah, it's nice to get back into a routine. I'm definitely a
Yeah,
routine person, so it helps to get acclimated quickly.
this is cool. And we got to know each other following the webinar you had with Julie Nowak and from Party Slate last month, which again I'm very grateful because it was really good experience for me to hear that wedding industry is a very diverse group of people, but I'm very drawn to folks with a finance background because it's quite similar to mine. And I messaged David saying, hey, like, it was really great to hear your wisdom and your interesting insights. We should do something like that with Maru. And thanks a lot for your time connecting with us today and going through this topic.
Of course,
David,
happy to be here. Glad you reached out.
amazing. David, just as a quick intro, would you mind sharing about your journey? So from the finance world and then like how you got to the events industry, what you're doing right now.
Sure. Yeah, I've always been a math finance guy. I went to the University of Tampa. I have a finance degree. My first job after college, I was actually selling life insurance and variable annuities. So sales role, kind of in the finance world, but mostly working with people, which was a great foundation for just dealing with rejection and putting yourself out there. And honestly, just overall a great sales foundation. After that, I was doing finance and accounting recruiting on the perm side. So again, selling people rather than a tangible product. And actually at that job, I had a mentor who invited me to the GLAD Gala, and I met my former boss, there who was an event designer. And,
Yeah.
I really was looking to do something more creative, and we kept in touch for about a year. He was ready to hire. I was ready to make a change. And I worked for him for about 6 years and then resigned, went out on my own, and just started year 5. So I've been in this industry for a little bit over a decade, and on my own for 4 very interesting years.
That's amazing. Congrats. And interesting enough, I didn't know about the fact that you started in the sales job because you'll
Yeah.
be surprised. I did exactly this was my first job as well from university. I worked in
Wait,
Procter and
really?
Gamble. Yeah, doing like
Okay.
sales job there as well. So it's pretty cool. And I see you have a lot of friends joining in the chat. Renee and Gabriel. So and
Yes.
Marina also saying hi to you.
Love it.
Cool.
I got thank you for
So
saying.
yeah, it's looks like a lot of great friends out there. David, so going to the topic, of the webinar, we wanted to chat about the goal setting because it's the beginning of the year. The season is kind of already like starting. We
Yep.
can see on Maru's side there are bookings coming up. But one thing, I've been in the industry for 3 years, so obviously not that as much as yourself. But one thing I observed is that there is some room where people can like plan and set goals for like clearly for themselves in order to kind of say, hey, this is what I want to achieve, and like this is how I'm going there. And I
Yeah.
think this is a very kind of interesting topic where I really resonated with in your speech during the webinar at Party Slate. So I was very curious. How do you set goals for your business? How do you start? When do you start? If you have any cycle of reviewing them and so on.
Yeah. I feel like I'm always analyzing and reevaluating and changing those goals. I think a lot of people think it's January, let me start setting these goals. Honestly, I think where you begin is looking at your past year, analyzing all of that data. So your profit and loss analysis, where did I spend money? Where did I not spend money? How did I make money? What types of jobs was I doing? Was it heavy on the wedding side? Is it heavy on corporate side? I think data is really the key to setting your goals, right? So you're seeing what type of revenue I have coming in, what kind of money I'm making, taking that information and saying, okay, do I scale, meaning I want more revenue? Do I want to try to tighten up in some areas where I spent too much? I think when you're setting goals, it's really about enabling growth, and scaling your business. And that, you want to do that in a way where you're not hindering yourself, right? So sometimes people can grow financially, their revenue's coming in, but if your expenses, for example, are growing at the same rate, you're really not making any more money. You're just doing more work. It's okay sometimes if profit margins change, meaning your first million, you make 50%, but your second million, you make 30. So overall, you're now at 40. Well, what factors change that you're making less there? So really, it's about looking at all that information, designing a budget. And I know everyone always says, well, like, yeah, of course I have a budget. But a lot of people aren't really following them or implementing them.
Yeah.
And how do you design a budget, right? You want to see how much revenue do I have coming in? How much money am I making? And where can I allocate funds to? I think it's also really important to understand, what type of money you need to make to actually be able to run your business. So what's your break-even number? How much revenue do you have to bring in at what rate to make enough money just to survive, let alone be profitable beyond that? I think a key with that a lot of people don't consider, especially entrepreneurs that it's only themselves, is how much are you paying yourself? That should be part of that budget, and anything on top of that is money that your company made that in turn can go into your pocket, or you could reinvest it. But I think that's a great baseline to start with. And when I'm talking about budgeting too and paying yourself, I always take that number and say, also apply this to your life. How much money do you need to make to afford the lifestyle that you want to live? So the two to me go hand in hand, especially for entrepreneurs.
Right.
So I think that's the beginning starting place.
And
Analyze that data.
yeah, and also my understanding that, in the goal setting, it's not just about finance, right? So for example, we've been just talking about the events you're going, because
Yeah.
it's a travel plans, but they're
Yeah.
connected to finance. How, for example, if you don't mind, sharing as well, like how do you plan for those events in terms of like directions, costs, ROI, and things like that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's goes into the marketing category, right? So where am I spending to go out there and network and talk to people? I mean, quite honestly, the best way to market in our industry is face to face. It's meeting people, it's them getting to know who you are. So I always set aside a certain amount to be able to go to these types of events. And I sort of scale that up and down based off of what my revenue looks like. The ROI piece is sometimes hard to calculate. But I'll say this, I mean, I've been going to Engage summits for 6 or 7 years now. I've been to 9 or 10 of them. And I can tell you 4 or 5 specific events that I produced because of relationships I made there. And it's funny, as a designer, I think it's a little bit harder to go to these types of events and to get a lot of business. If you're a photographer or a videographer, I think going to networking events is more to your advantage because it's mostly planners and designers and people that will actually directly hire you.
Yeah.
On the design side, I think I've been lucky being in the Boston market where there's not a lot of people in our industry here. And the referrals that I've gotten, honestly, are from other event design firms in other cities that have a client that says, hey, I'm getting married or doing a corporate event in Boston. Here's the guy I know there that you should work with.
Right.
So for me, it's definitely been worthwhile. You also need to take into consideration the ROI aspect of, the people that you meet and what you learn, right? There is a value associated to that, although it's hard to actually value it.
Yeah.
It definitely there's different outcomes there that I think it's all about your expectation and what you go in looking to get out of them.
Cool. And in sometime early, you mentioned about the kind of the structure, like profit and loss that's needed to be reviewed in the end of the year. Would you mind just giving like a quick walkthrough, like what are
Yeah.
the lines on the P&L statement as it's being called? Because we touched
Yeah.
right now about the marketing, which is one of the operating expenses type of accounts, but there's just so much more. And how do you think about planning each of those?
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone needs to know how much money you're making off of every job that you do, whether you're a photographer, a planner, a designer, and some categories within our industry, like a photographer, for example, it's pretty cut and dry what your profit margin is or how much you're making off an event. If you charge 20,000, your expenses are, 2,000, you're making 90% off of that job. It's your time investment, which is also a great topic to talk about eventually. It's something that everyone should always consider. As a designer or someone who's implementing, tangible goods, it's a little bit more variable because sometimes you overspend, you underspend, you need more labor, you need less. But keeping track of that constantly is my advice. So from a profit and loss standpoint, we do an individual analysis on every single event that we produce. So I don't send out a proposal without knowing what my expected profit is off of that job. And then, we calculate the actual. So as I spend anything, if I buy a lunch with that client, it's going immediately onto that profit and loss. So I know how much I've spent, how much we have left to spend in order to stay within those margins. I think a lot of people don't do that. I'm a little neurotic with it. I mean, I do it in my personal life too. So I have my personal budget as I spend money. I'm delete that and the credit card goes up or you transfer monies. So my personal experience with it has just always been a way of life for me. So when it comes to my business, I treat it the same way. And I think it's important because you always know the financial health of your company or where you're at in any scenario. And again, it's analyzing that data. So it's the same thing with designing the budget, designing the P&L. And then overall, at the end of the year, there's a profit and loss for your entire company. So you take all these little models that you've done individually, and then you're able to look at, bigger numbers within that too.
Nice. And you mentioned that like your personal habits kind of around financial management translate into the business. What could be like your advice for for people who are in the kind of early stages of learning those skills, or like they want to they aspire to get to that level? What's the easiest way to start?
Start very simple. Honestly, you could create a budget in Excel. Figure out just what it costs, what's your cost of living? How much money do you need to be able to get by month to month? Don't think about saving and investing immediately, although it is smart to do that as well, or even if it's just a little bit. Start with basics and then figure out, okay, hey, I don't really need that much to live. My 10 years in this industry, I lived in the exact same apartment. I had very low rent, I had very low expenses, and I had no lifestyle inflation. It might have looked at via Instagram because you're always working at a Four Seasons or you're going to these beautiful events. But quite honestly, I kept my expenses low so that I could save money to start my company. So that would be my biggest advice for people is, have a personal budget, make one for your company. And if you're new, realize that, you also might be spending a little bit more at times to invest into your company. And it's also okay to put money in to hopefully get more out of it later.
I think you shared a really good point that how it helped you during, the COVID years when, things were not as bright. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I started my company October of 2019. So I had this like beautiful 10-week run. I made some good money. I was able to save it to go into a slow season, which is January through March. And then COVID hit. And then there was no money coming in. Fortunately, there's the government gives you some. I did fine. I got through with no problems. There wasn't a whole lot of growth. But in that case, it was a matter of just getting by. And I think it was a great learning experience. I think people should always look at this too, as throughout the year, there's these different areas where you're much busier, you're much slower. For me last year, July and October were our highest revenue producing months. I think we did about 40% of our revenue in October. So I knew that January, honestly, through June last year, I really wasn't profitable. I had so much money going out in expenses for future events, and there just wasn't as much revenue coming in. But I knew I was going to be, right? So again, that's that analysis. Like you're not always going to be profitable week to week, month to month. In our industry, it's not steady. And I think, you have to have that mental mindset and be able to handle those moments where you're dipping into savings or even just funds that you've allocated to get by during that period.
Absolutely.
One thing when you're making a lot.
Yeah. One thing that's really like one of my observations is like my background is coming from, again, finance, startups and things like that, where it's all about growth. Like just you need to grow. And what I noticed in the wedding and events industry, it's actually like a lot of people are saying, hey, I don't need to do like, 100 events per year. I want to do like 20 very high profile, high revenue type of events, like luxury events. But I just don't need to have. And it's kind of like for me in the beginning, when I just kind of joined the industry, it was frankly counterintuitive. It was something that I was like, whoa, like usually people just like, hey, I need to grow, I need to make my business bigger and so on. And that's this is where I think one question I had is, how do you set those goals which are tailored to you, to your own situation, to your preferences around like this year I want to achieve X versus and in parallel, how do you set goals that are kind of like stretching yourself a bit? Like, hey, I want to grow. I still like want to develop. Like, for example, I want to go to those educational events, which will require obviously a budget. So I need to like do an extra step.
So I'll start from where you started at the beginning. So everyone that says, hey, I want to just do luxury large events. Of course, that's always all of our goals. The reality of that is, it's not always feasible. And sometimes you have to do the smaller events to get the bigger ones. So what I mean by that is I've done this. And again, it goes to the analyzing. I looked at my numbers last year, and our top 5 events brought us, I think it was like 68% of our overall revenue. So that makes sense. And the large ones, my friend Todd from Todd Events calls them the whales. They're really the ones that you should not include as growth, because you're not always going to get them. So if you did 5 big, great weddings this year, you might only have 2 of those next year. So not using those as part of that data, I think, is a very smart thing to do. We're not considering them growth necessarily. So I've done this where I've analyzed my work and I've looked at smaller items, and I'm like, why am I doing a $10,000 or a $5,000 or $15,000 wedding? Well, the reality is, for me, it might be with a planner who then might have a better event for you down the road. And some of the smaller events too. So for my company, for example, we are the in-house event design firm for Four Seasons, One Dalton, and we do a lot of their internal events and for corporate clients and for them specifically. So these smaller events are actually about building that relationship too. So you have to consider what relationships you're building by taking these on. Are they still profitable? The other thing that I always consider is I have low expenses when it comes to employees, right? And so sometimes when you're taking on these smaller events, you're providing work for people that need to work consistently and people that want to work for you. So I always look at it twofold. It's like, yeah, I don't want to do a lot of smaller events where I don't make much, but I also want to provide for the team that helps me do what I do. I mean, I couldn't implement in the way that we do if I didn't have them. So it's a double-edged sword sometimes. You got to look at it from both angles.
Yeah. And I think speaking of employees, because ultimately that's another line on your profit and loss statement, right?
Yeah.
Part of the operating expenses every business incurs. I think you had a very interesting perspective around how to balance like employees, so people you have on the team with like full scale payroll and contractors, because that's the area when you allow yourself to be flexible around, depending on the how many events you have in the moment, right? Would you mind sharing more on this?
Yeah, of course. I always reference this as like being breathable, like being able to expand your expenses and contract them when necessary. So I have one other full-time employee other than myself, and then I'm very lucky to have a list of designers that work for us quite regularly, almost on every event, who don't always need full-time work. So Andrew and myself are on my fixed expenses. That's part of my budget for the year. Everyone else that I bring on, those costs are allocated specifically for each event, and they go on that profit and loss analysis. I calculate what I'm estimating my labor cost to be for each event before sending out that proposal. So those become the subcontractors or the contractors, and essentially they're a cost of goods sold. So it directly relates to the sale of that job. So all of those funds are allocated within whatever job that is. Now, there are times where, we'll hire people to come in. We need help reorganizing the studio, or, inventories coming in. Those costs are just, you have to know they're variable, and those are going to come at times too. You can't really allocate that towards a specific event. Or sometimes you can, sometimes you're saying, hey, we just did this crazy wedding weekend. Well, we need 3 days next week for everyone to come back in and clean the product. I consider those moments, but there are certainly times where, like, this past year, we got a cooler, for example. So having an electrician come in, having staff come in to pick it up, deliver it, set it up. I mean, those are just costs that, the price of doing business, at least, on my end. Now I can relate it to someone who's not in the tangible side. So take like a photographer or a videographer, for example, they need a second shooter or a third shooter. That's allocated specifically towards that fee. So, they might charge that 20, their expenses are 2, and now they're 3,000 because they brought someone else on. So your percentage drops to 85 instead of 90. That's okay, but you should know what that's going to look like from the start. And you're obviously charging more when you're hiring more people for that job.
I think all those points are very correlated with the terms of gross profit and net profit. Because you mentioned them a few times. Because ultimately you have some expenses that's, they're related or they're variable, so they're linked to specific events. But then you have something like, to your point, electricity or, software that you're running or anything that will happen just because, or, employee expenses that will happen regardless of like whether you have one event or two. And that's what, we call base costs, right? That will sit in your P&L, like regardless of what's happening in the business. And that will ultimately constitute to your net profit margins, which what you basically bring in the end of the day, whether you invested it in the business or you just take yourself as a business owner.
Right.
And I think it's very important to think about the nature of those expenses, because the level of control on them it's different. So variable, typically you have much more control, or to your point, you need to factor them up front, while the base, it's like, there is just not much you can do.
And even an event planner, like, they some charge a flat rate fee, some charge a percentage, and there's debates on what's better. To me, as long as you're considering your time, at both work, I think actually a hybrid of the two is a great model. But I know some planners will charge for how many employees they bring on or how much staff they have, the weekend event, the day of an event, and I know others that don't. So, in some cases, like the planner that does, that what they're going to make remains the same for the most part. And the one that needs to actually take part of that fee and pay for their employees, they're going to make less. So they might be a little bit more cognizant on how many people they're bringing on. Whereas the planner who charges those, I build in a little buffer. Why not give yourself a little bit less stress? If your client's okay with it and you can sell it that way, great. But yeah, I mean, it's case by case, event by event.
Right. And just kind of, we're approaching half an hour, just kind of to wrap it up. So we were chatting about, how to set goals, and ultimately one big statement I took away, it's know your numbers, like know how much, you make, how much it costs you. Your proposal is always start from the cost, like understand how much it's going to cost you just simply to be break even, then add your, margin that you feel like you need to sustain your lifestyle or, to sustain your business. And that's how you set the price for the events, for the, for the annual or like monthly budget, for the annual budget, and so on. And ultimately, know all the numbers like per each of the profit and loss statement lines or accounts. So you have much more control around when things will fluctuate within a year, which they happen to have. Well, they do happen. Things like that happen. You have more, again, control around how do you adapt to the seasonality, how you can like buffer yourself, and so on. And that's kind of, I think it's a good transition to this year. So 2024, I'm very curious, like, what are your expectations? Because, when I joined, it was like the industry and like started looking at it was 2020. So it's kind of like in the midst of COVID. So I felt it was like absolutely abnormal type of environment. 2022, 2023, it's kind of like getting like more settled, as I was told, like becoming more normal.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, what do you think about 2024?
Yeah, it's funny. This is the time of year where I'm always looking at numbers and I'm like a little worried. And then Andrew, my number two, my CEO, he's always like, can you just calm down? He's like, our turnaround times are always so fast. Like, the revenue's coming. Look where we were last year. We're in a similar place. I would say things seem to be a little bit slower. Everyone keeps saying, oh, there's going to be faster turnaround time, so just get ready for it. So I think that's hopefully something to keep in mind. I'm hoping that is the case too. I mean, I think diversifying what you do sometimes help. I mean, for us, it's balancing weddings with corporate and galas, so making sure there's a nice ratio between them, so that you still have work at different periods of time. But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely expecting things to be a lot faster this year. So I think what we're doing is really getting ahead of the current work that we have, so that when those moments happen, we can really take it on. I think the only other thing I wanted to touch on too, I saw in the last question, like people were talking about, I think it was one of the issues was pricing strategies and then cash flow management. From a cash flow management perspective, what I always do, anytime I have a deposit for a future year, it goes into a separate account Whereas if and so does all of my deposits for the current year that are not in the month that I'm working within. So that is a great way to be able to make sure that you're spending the money for that current month. Now, if you were putting a deposit down for an event that's next year or in a later month, I would pull that money from that account and just make note of it on that P&L. So you constantly see where you're spending. I think one thing that we talked about, Alex, that a lot of people mention in our industry is they're always a little bit behind and they need more cash flow coming in to get ahead. And that is the worst place to be because you're spending future monies on current jobs. And so you are behind and their cash flow is not good. And I think the best way to do that, I would say, is to have separate accounts where you can put those funds in and understand what you're spending in those current moments. From a pricing strategy perspective, consider the hybrid. If you're a planner or even a designer, understand that, there is tangibles there, but there's also fees associated. So make sure you're accounting for not just the goods that you're selling, but also the time that you're putting into it. And if you're a planner, I think flat rate works, but I think you're going to have to gradually increase it as cost of doing business increases. And consider the hybrid of also using percentage or just doing percentage in general. But if you're charging that percentage, make sure you are considering time. Meaning, if someone is spending more, that's great. But if all of a sudden they don't, but they're taking up a lot of your time, you're really not making that much more money because it might take you a lot more time. So those are my two quick tips on the pricing strategies. And I'm happy to answer anyone's questions after this too, if you have anything specifically related to yourself.
I can see, Marina asked specifically about, the percentage versus flat fee. And I hope, you don't mind me bringing an example from a startup world, because like we're working with a lot of financial technology partners in order to support Maru and like payments processes that we run on the platform. And the most common pricing strategy for these guys, so basically it's a layer between the bank, so like let's say JP Morgan and Maru, or companies like Maru, so startups. What they tell us always is like, hey, we have monthly minimum of, let's say, like $2,500, and then if you start like producing more transactions, we charge you more. And I think this is a pretty fair pricing strategy when their monthly minimum is not crazy, like it's decent, but it gives them, I think, to your point, certain minimum profit margin that will sustain their business, that will ensure bills are covered and so on. And at the same time, they grow together with us. So as we expand, they grow too. And I think for planners, again, I hope that, for people from the industry wouldn't mind me like kind of comparing those two examples. Is like, if the client is demanding more, or they're asking for more, and like expanding their initial plans around the budget, around the things that needs to be pulled together, hey, that's taking your time. It's taking your resources, maybe not your personal, but like for you to negotiate or connect with all the people that have to be kind of pulled together, orchestrated, and so on. So I think it's very fair to introduce certain like minimum and then percentage, because if we agree on the initial budget and then we start going over, that's way beyond like what you planned, as a professional. So I actually big supporter for this idea.
Me too, and I think it's all about your contract and how you sell that, right? Here are the tasks that I'm going to take on. Maybe you even allocate hours towards each task, and they accumulate to being 500 hours, and you charge $50,000, and then you write a clause in there that says, hey, if we kind of go over these categories, here's my hourly rate, so that you're hedging your loss. I'm in full agreement with you. I think it works on both ends. I think people are very understanding of it too, if it's laid out early on.
See, there is a question from Brendan. David, would you say your banking cash flow strategy is more so similar to a profit first sort of approach, or just allocating the funds to your accounts purely based on what you're working on at that month?
It's honestly, it's purely based on what I'm working on that month. So my profit goes into another account. So I'm constantly working with the cash flow of that given month. So for example, if I'm transitioning in from June to July and I have 5 weddings in July, all of those deposits that I have, whether it's the initial or I'm up to a 50%, that's all transferred into my checking account, and that's what I'm using for those specific events. Again, if I'm paying a deposit, say I'm bringing on a lighting company and I'm giving them a $10,000 deposit, I will pull it from whatever account those funds are in and make note of it. To me, it takes a little bit more work, but again, you constantly know how much money you have in profit, how much money you've spent, what more you have to spend. And I would say get ahead on the taxes too. I have to deal with sales tax. A lot of people don't. If you're selling just a service, you're not taxed on any tangibles. But also, if say you make $100,000 in Q1, understand that you also are going to have to pay on the profit that you made there too. So I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't consider, and then sometimes they're overspending. If you know those numbers, you can then make a decision on, am I able to go to this educational conference? Can I spend $5, $10, sometimes $15,000 to hopefully bring monies back in? That's kind of where I'm figuring out right now is, okay, how much do I have to spend on growth and marketing and networking, and where do I want to allocate it and why? I hope that answered Brendan's question.
I hope so. Brendan, let us know if it did. One thing I really, I got really interested about, when you explained how you manage the bank accounts. Back in my corporate career days, we had this thing which is called project accounting. It's basically the kind of the way of managing your expenses that's there when you tag them to specific project. So when you incur, to your point, like we purchased certain, flowers, right, for this event, you basically tag them like, this belongs to project A. And when you receive money from the client, they also tag to like this project A. So in the end of the day, we just click the button in our software and we produced a clean P&L statement for project A. And we always saw that, hey, exactly kind of mirroring what you're saying is like how to, manage the gross profit and net profit of specific event to ensure that you're staying on target. And, the target is actually in line with your annual financial planning strategy. And I think like that's what I'm bringing into Maru as well. It's like we want to build solutions like that, which will help wedding and events professional in a very simple way, just to like say this expense or like this cost or payment to this freelancer belong to like this event, or in this income that I receive from a client, it's actually to this event as well. So in the end of the day, you actually can see the very clean picture of like that's what you incurred, and then tax management is just right on point because it's a big item that we see a lot of businesses are kind of remembering only like when the tax season starts.
I would 100% use that feature, by the way. Like, and because it's an automated process of it, and it's going to make it a lot easier for people to do this almost mindlessly. Whereas, you could say some of my methods are a little archaic. They work. But I love, a feature like that comes out and says, hey, this is so simple. I mean, I use QuickBooks, for example, and you can do that in there too, where you allocate, okay, this is expense went to this event. Not everyone does their own accounting or bookkeeping. Exactly. I do it again because I'm just neurotic about where I want my monies to be and where everything's at. And I enjoy it. I mean, that is the finance person in me. So I think that feature would help people tremendously, and it would save them time in doing it.
Well, we really hope so. David, one more question I wanted to ask is about what we discussed earlier about best and base case scenarios, because sometimes from my experience, I saw when people finally decide to jump into the financial planning journey, they're like, I'm gonna be successful, I'm gonna achieve everything in this world. So the projections just like grow. How do you build the realistic forecast which accounts seasonality, which accounts, to your point, those whale events that are they might come, might not. How do you basically build those two scenarios and ultimately stay honest to yourself?
So I start with what I know is going to be repeat business. So we do a number of fundraising galas that usually have the same budget or a little bit increased to account for inflation year to year. So those are the first things where I know, okay, that's definitely revenue that's coming in. Holiday parties, clients, again, anything that's repeat business. The weddings are a little bit harder because you just don't know how many you're going to get and to what budget they're going to be. So quite honestly, like I pay myself a very reasonable salary. It's really enough to pay for my expenses. So knowing what those initial costs are at a very modest rate, knowing what your return business always is going to be. My hope is that when I look at those two numbers, that's my break even, so that anything above that, the whale wedding or a random, last year we had 3 weddings booked for July and May, and we had 5. So like to me, that was all cake on top of it because I wasn't anticipating. And then I can look at those funds and say, okay, is that money in my pocket? Is that money that I reinvest? Am I buying new inventory? Am I going to another networking event? And that model's hard for not everyone obviously can operate that way. I mean, I think some planners that don't just do weddings have those events that they know they're getting every year. Photographers might have the same example, but if you're someone who is solely weddings focused, where usually these are one-time clients, usually that's also not I mean, a lot of the times it's not the case. Baby shower, brother or sister gets married, legacy client is great, but consider just the one-time transaction. You're a little bit iffier, but I'll say this, if that is your model, most likely you don't have overhead other than yourself. So if you do go from 12 weddings to 5 one year, yeah, you're making a lot less, but you probably don't have as many expenses that are your fix for the year as well. I think it really just depends on what you do within our industry.
Yeah. I think Gabriel is asking a quite related question. So, depending on like when there is certain activity in one specific market versus another, and like with your experience of traveling all over the world, do you manage your time in a way that, hey, like Boston is quieter during this period, so I'm moving to another market, or how do you manage, or how do you counter this seasonality?
So I'm so happy Gabrielle mentioned this question because she is a Boston-based planner, but also does destination. And we did a fabulous wedding together in October in Laguna Beach, Boston client. And it was great for all of us to go out there. We figured out new models and new collaborations and approaches. And that was definitely a whale for us, one of those kind of one-off. I would say this, the core of my business is in and around Boston, right? So most of my inventory is here, my team is here. It's easier for me to implement more design elements being in the Boston area than it is to do that elsewhere, where I have to outsource those elements. So as you can imagine, the local events, my profit margins are higher because I'm doing more of that physical work. When you outsource it, it's hard to make as much money as if you were the one doing it. So you take that mental, you take that loss in mind when you're pricing it or when you're taking that job. But the reality is you don't have as much time and cost that goes into it. So it kind of outweighs it. I was trying to very early on, actually during my slow season, so January through April, I had met a wonderful man. His name's Stephen Boyle. He has since passed away, unfortunately. And we were going to collaborate on events in Hawaii where he was based. He said, David, my busy season is January through May. Why don't you come out here during slow season so that you're keeping the revenue stream going? So I've taken that approach a little bit, where right now we've been trying to travel a bit more. So the reason I was in Mexico was not just enjoyment of New Year's Eve, but also we've done some work with the Four Seasons out there. The St. Regis had also invited us out. We're just trying to deepen those connections with specifically Four Seasons. We have a great relationship with them brand wide, but you really just have to start to get in front of people to make things happen. The marketing director of the One Dalton location left a few years ago, went to Miami. Now she's actually the marketing director of Punta Mita and Nevis. So Punta Mita, where I was, where we did an event a year ago, she's now there and we've worked together. So she knows how I operate. Stephen Boyle used to do a lot of work at the Nevis location, Four Seasons. So again, it's just like putting out energy and trying new things. And it might not happen immediately, but the connections will eventually come if you keep pushing at it. So, I'm hoping in the near future we'll be doing more destination. Also understanding that, hey, my core is always going to be in and around the Boston area.
Nice. There is a question from Kellen. I'd love to know, what do your clients desire most in a wedding photographer? is there a skill deliverable that you see trending in recent years that didn't in the past? Curious where you see them investing. And if I may add to this question, how do you account, like when you see a certain trend, how do you account for your own learning or investment in, I don't know, tools or anything like that, depending on this trend, because it also affects your financial planning for the year?
Yeah, I mean, I see moodier and moodier photography coming out and people loving that. Um, I'm also seeing film come back into play, which I think is really cool. Um, I don't want to speak too much on this aspect because I'm usually not the one referring a photographer as much as I like to, because obviously I want also great imagery of my work. But I think it's important, one, to be able to connect with them and then have diversity within that work. I think less portraiture and more in the moment photography is what people are really looking for. And I think the more you can show that and show clients that are happy, I think, you can start to then raise your prices. Photography, I think it's great. As I mentioned before, there's high profit margins there. I think the main difference from what I do is I'm mostly selling tangibles with a service associated, whereas photographer is, for the most part, solely a service-based industry. So really, you have to consider, the touch points with your client, the amount of time you spend with them, which therefore will build the trust, right? So those are the three things that you really have to focus on with your clients, because you don't have a tangible product the way that, someone like me does.
Sorry for your question, Kellen. If we kind of return to the financial planning topic, I was very curious about what are the most common traps that you see, like people in the wedding industry or events industry face with when they decide, like, okay, I'm gonna like start building my financial plan, financial forecast, like I'm doing my first steps, but like where potential risks are, so people can look out for them, as they kind of embark on this journey.
I think it comes with when people attempt to scale and not understand why they want to grow or how they want to grow. So you can invest a lot of money in the infrastructure that it takes to take on more work, but there's this balance of timing, right? And it's do you build the infrastructure to then get the work, or do you get the work and then build the infrastructure? You have to find a balance between those two that works for you. Someone asked me this when I was speaking at WIPA last year, and they said, well, don't you have a lot of anxiety knowing that like your overhead is so high? And I do at times, but my overhead grew as I saw my revenue growing. So I really tried to finesse the balance in a way where I was constantly comfortable investing in more things. Like I just started my 5th year in the business. We just got our first studio space this past March. So the first 3 years in business, I mean, mind you, COVID was happening too, so I didn't need one. But I was lucky to be able to sub-rent spaces during high concentrated periods of time where I had a lot of work. And then in the slow periods, I didn't have that piece to my overhead. So that piece has changed for me because I all of a sudden have, a large amount of inventory. So I needed storage in a production location. So I think it's just being careful with where you're spending and why. And again, those decisions are really for you to make. They're going to vary depending on what those goals are that you've set in place. I think some people don't always have to invest in the infrastructure so much, and it's more they can feasibly grow their team as they get more work. But yeah, that's where I think where people fall short sometimes is like, if you come to my studio, it's not the prettiest thing. I didn't, paint the walls and buy new doors and this, that, and the other. I'm not meeting clients there. I can sometimes, but actually it's nice to kind of see that balance of like, here's the nitty gritty. And then obviously we go to this luxury location. People actually like seeing that balance. But yeah, I mean, there was no reason for me other than getting a cooler and shelving and things like that. I would just don't get caught up with inflating the vision of what you're doing so much. I think people can fall into those trappings sometimes. And I've talked about this before too. It's, you're living a lifestyle business where you're getting to do the dream work that you do and live the life you want to live. But is the infrastructure that you've built for that financially sustainable? Is it actually bringing you money, or are you just getting by? And maybe you are just getting by and you're okay with that because that's your personal goal. But again, I bring it back to what I said before. It's the lifestyle inflation. Don't inflate your business too fast. Don't do it with your lifestyle until you're really ready for it.
I can 100%, second that and relate to that because, one thing that's, one example from startup world that like we've been told again and again when Maru was just starting is, um, because startups are basically very similar to, to the events businesses and wedding businesses because like we run them, like it's not a corporation, it's not a, something major with thousands of employees. Like everything we do or decisions we make will affect ourselves as founders, as a founding team. And one thing we've been told again and again is like just be honest with yourself. Like don't create some metrics or like show yourself or investors like, oh, we're getting like so many clients or revenues going up, while in reality like it might not be true. You're just like creating those vanity metrics that kind of show growth, but the underlying fundamentals and the baseline might be absolutely rotten or just not true. And like you can tell yourself those imaginary things for some time, but reality will hit. And that's something really kind of stuck with me, and like we try to use at Maru quite often, if not a daily basis. So and one example I have from kind of startup world is Airbnb. So Brian Chesky and his team, like they launched literally from their own home with the air mattress and breakfast that they gave to the first person, and they've been like that for the first, I believe, year or so. They were almost done, like, and they were ready to close, living in the same kind of like environment and kind of in this space before things really took off, in 2008. So I can totally relate to the fact like don't be scared to plan and really plan the level of your growth and level of and based on the level of your expenses, because that's a really like impactful thing that can make or break the business.
Yeah, it's like simple. Buy a house before a Mercedes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like somebody, but people think it's optics. I need a beautiful car to show up so this client thinks, or the clothes. Like I'm not a labels person. I just like things that are quite transitional and don't have a name on it. But that's just an easy example of it. I mean, live below your means if you can. And then enjoy those moments where you get a little bit more and you can enjoy yourself. But definitely be cognizant of it.
By saying, David, you're just cool.
Thank you, Twa. Twa's amazing. Wonderful
Oh
photographer.
yeah.
We should have asked Twa this question. She would have a better response because I mean she's been featured everywhere. Her work's incredible. And you know what? I have tons of conversations like this with her all the time on the finance side, but also just about manifesting what you want out of the year and how you're going to do it. I mean, there is a piece to putting like the positive thoughts and energy and motion behind it that really will come back to you eventually. And I think, sometimes people get stuck in the trappings of like, oh, my year looks so bad, it's going to stay bad. It's like, don't have that mindset. Change it around. Do something. Change up your routine so that, there maybe is a new influence that comes into play. Yeah, don't buy design. I agree.
Yeah, and speaking of that point, would you suggest or like do you know any innovative ways like you've seen businesses successfully generate income beyond just the traditional services that they offer, like as an alternative to kind of compensate if there is a slow period?
Oh, like where to diversify what you sell or what you do?
Yeah, maybe you saw some examples where people like, for example, you said, if things slower in Boston, you can go to the warmer, territories like Hawaii and, work during a certain time there. But like, just in case you saw some examples of, people taking on some different type of job or like type of services they offered if, things were a bit slower.
I mean, listen, if you are a designer who gets to a place where, and you're a smaller company and you're like, hey, I have no business these next 3 months. I work with a lot of people that also do what I do. I bring them on as part of my team when I have a big event and I need extra hands. And for a few reasons, I mean, not just because I need the people, but I learn so much from them. One of the things that I pride myself on is curating teams of people that have different backgrounds because their creativity is different. It's infused from their experience. It's the life that they've lived. And I mean, I look at my design team, I have people in their 60s to people in their 20s. And the people in the 60s are teaching the 20-year-olds and everywhere in between. And I'm learning and I'm teaching. And it's a great atmosphere. I mean, same thing with photographers. I mean, team up with a photographer who is doing luxury. Maybe they do need a second shooter and they love your work. I see a lot of event planner friends, that will be a day of person with another event planner. I think that's okay. I think on the personal side, just diversification in general, whether it be, your team, but it's also, your assets and where you're investing, I think is smart just to, maybe have dividends or something else or equity growing somewhere. I know it's not always like the easiest path to just dip right into, but I think that's also smart as an entrepreneur to know that, my business isn't my sole resource for income.
In conclusion, would you be able to recommend any resources or tools that wedding professionals should have at their disposal to expand their financial skills or, to perform those financial planning type of exercises? I would say, I would expect you to say like Excel, but like maybe something beyond just that.
It's funny because I've asked this question when I've gone to networking events and I get that same answer. I'm like, well, what are people doing to keep track of this? Whereas like, are there models? And honestly, I come back to Excel and so do they. It really is a great way to keep track of it. I use Excel, I use QuickBooks. I don't have any apps or anything in particular that help me on this journey. If anyone knows any, I would love to hear them, to be honest. Yeah,
Cool.
I mean, honestly, though, like I went to Pillars of Production this past year that Todd Events did. It was wonderful from a learning perspective. I think investing in talking with other people that you think are competitors that will actually share a lot of information and being vulnerable and okay doing the same, and being okay sharing your shortcomings. I mean, honestly, too, like take a course. I was fortunate to go to school for finance. So I have a background on these different aspects. Quite honestly, I would love to go back for an MBA or even just go take courses on like negotiation. I think will be very beneficial at this point in my life and be able to be in front of a group of people that might be like myself, different types of entrepreneurs that have life experience and kind of comparing what that looks like. That's what a lot of these networking events are about. Engage, RSVP. There's a wedding CEO, MBA. All of these different ones will hone in on these types and link you up with people that I think will help you in these categories. And I'm also always happy to chat with anyone too.
You mentioned that you were thinking also to start, a masterclass around this topic around financial management this year, I believe.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I've definitely been considering it more and more. I think, again, this year is a little bit slower and it's consistent throughout the year, whereas last year it was getting ahead. Thank you for sharing my website here. It actually is in the middle of being updated. We have it launching hopefully by the end of next month. My website is the same as it's been since I launched, so you won't see a lot of my work on there, but please check out my Instagram. But yeah, I mean, the masterclass thing is something that I would love. I love to teach. I love the financial side to this. I think there's so many other topics that we just touched a little bit upon today that would be so beneficial. I mean, even when I mentioned like paying myself a reasonable salary, I mean, I'm an S Corp, so you can also pay yourself dividends on top of that that aren't taxed as much. There's so much on the legality side when it comes to contracts. I definitely look forward to developing something in the very near future.
It's amazing, David. And in the end of the call, a quick 5 questions splits on the more like personal. What's your favorite cuisine?
My favorite cuisine. Honestly, I'll take a chicken tender any day.
Nice. That's cool.
Yeah. That or like ceviche. And I know those are kind of like opposite, but yeah, just depends on if I'm feeling healthy or not.
Cool. What's your favorite city in the world and why?
My favorite city. Honestly, I love Italy overall, not just because I'm Italian, and I lived in Rome for a little bit when I was in college. I studied abroad there, and I honestly I just fell in love with the way of life there. It's a crazy hustle and bustle, and there's just so much to explore. Yeah, that would be my top.
Nice. And it looks like you met with Tua in Italy as well.
I did meet Twa in Italy. I did. And I was recently there with Marina as well.
Oh. Wasn't it during one of the Engage there?
It was
Or
RSVP Club, which
okay.
was in November, early November this past year.
Okay. What's your best music track of 2023? What was on your playlists like on repeat?
If I was to look at my Spotify, it would probably be some sort of Sade remix.
Nice. That's cool.
Yeah, there's a
What's your
Smooth Operator that just came out, I think, last year.
That's cool. What's your favorite app on your phone?
Right now it's my Sonos app because I finally have it in my house.
Oh,
I
that's
had a
cool.
JBL for years, just a little speaker. Speaking of lifestyle inflation, and finally invested in a Sonos system. So I love just being able to go on there and turn everything on.
Yeah, so it's a bit more ambient type of environment with music, right?
Yeah, outside of that, I try not to get lost in too many of the apps because it pulls my focus for too long.
Cool. And the last question, what would you wish to happen in 2024?
In 2024, I would love to have an international wedding. I've never done a wedding outside of the country, and I would really love to do that this year, preferably in Italy.
That's amazing. Marina is
Yeah.
saying, let's do it.
Yeah, no, I'm down, Marina. You know I'm ready. Yeah,
Awesome.
small or large, I think just, to have the experience of it would be wonderful.
That's fantastic. David, we're right on top of the hour. Thank you so much. This was absolutely amazing conversation. Really loved all the insights that you shared. We're going to share the recording with everyone on the call, plus,
Okay.
whoever kind of was not able to join. And yeah, I mean, this was first time for me. This was the best first time I could have wished for. So thanks a lot for your time. And again, all the insights, and thanks for everyone who joined the call as well.
Thank you so much. I've been excited to do this with you since the minute you reached out.
Great. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Take care.
Bye-bye.